Hi, good evening. From JPPI, the Jewish People Policy Institute, I'm Yaakov Katz, a senior fellow. And today we're joined by Shmuel Rosner, again, another senior fellow at JPPI. We'll be presenting more of the study and the poll and the wide survey of Israel and its sentiments towards the war and different aspects of what's happening in Israeli society since the outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Hamas just about 2.5 weeks ago, as well as by Rivka Ravitz, another senior fellow at the center, who specializes in the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi community. Rivka is a member, obviously, of that community, but also has spent years in the Israeli political system. Today, our special guest is Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the president of the Union of Reform Judaism in America, the largest, I would say, the largest community and with the largest denomination and membership of Jews in the United States. Rabbi Jacobs is here visiting Israel now as part of solidarity to express his movement and his own personal solidarity with the state of Israel. But I spoke with him earlier today about all the different issues that obviously Israel's dealing with, the reform movement, and also the tension that was definitely there before the war began between members of his community who were out on the streets also protesting against judicial reform. He himself spoke at different protests here in Israel and Tel Aviv, as well as in New York. So let's hear just a few words for the first few minutes from Rabbi Jacobs, and then we'll go to our panel of the day. Here we go. Rabbi Jacobs, thank you very much for joining this JPPI webinar. And we're talking, you're in Jerusalem. You've come here from the United States. I'm curious, what is the purpose of this trip? Solidarity. I saw you've been meeting with a lot of people, reservists, Knesset members. So if you could tell us just a bit about what brings you here.
Sure. Thank you, Yaakov. Well, it's important to be here. The bonds that connect the reform movement to the state of Israel are deep and profound. And this is a moment that is quite overwhelming, I think, to all of us who have been, not just watching from afar, but being very much involved in the unfolding life here. So I'm here in an expression of solidarity. It's pretty simple. I'm here to meet with leaders of the Israeli government, let them know how much we love and care and are standing with Israel in this critical hour. I'll be meeting with families of the hostages. I'll be paying condolence calls as we need to do. There's so many that we mourn. I'll also be meeting with our URJ staff that leads all of our educational programs here. I'll be meeting with rabbinical students at our Hebrew Union College. I'll be meeting with, the many people who are the heart and soul of this country, everyone who knows someone, everyone who has a family member in uniform. It's really important that everyone here know how connected we are and how committed we are. And we've been very busy in North America. Our job is to make sure that the elected officials who lead the United States government in the House, the Senate, obviously the White House, in local, cities and states, know how urgent these issues are, how much we stand with Israel, how much we are pressing for the release of the hostages. So our work is on both sides of the ocean, but I really feel I'm here as an emissary, as shaliach for the reform movement, to express our love and to give the country a giant hug, as it were.
So within the American Jewish community, the reform movement is by far with the greatest size of members, right? The largest portion of American Jewry. What do you think, how is this taken and how has this affected the community, this happening on that October 7th and what's Simchat Torah by us and a Chag also, of course, in the diaspora in the United States for Jewish communities? How has it affected the movement and your members, and what has the rally call been for people since then? I saw different things that you've written about at Tanit Tzibur and other, there've been rallies, but if you could talk to us just what's been happening.
Well, I think what's been happening first and foremost is our movement is deeply affected by the extraordinary mass murder of Jews, as we saw on October 7th. For many of us, we awoke to the news And it has been something that has sent shockwaves through our entire community. But it's not only a moment of feeling that pain and loss, which we feel, but also activism, to stand, to organize vigils in every one of our communities. I don't know a congregation that did not have interfaith and community leadership coming to the synagogue, standing maybe in a public place. And I know that we've also been busy speaking up to our elected officials to say thank you when they have been standing up for Israel in very important ways, and to call elected officials to account for their lack thereof. So I think, our movement is in high gear. I think on a normal, quiet day, there's a lot of activism for Israel. On a moment like this, obviously, everyone is rolling up their sleeves. What can they do? Where can they contribute? Where are the places where money should be contributed? Where is their need for their activism and care? So I think it's an all points bulletin for everyone who loves and cares for Israel. It doesn't matter if you're more liberal, more conservative on political matters. This is not one of those moments where those things matter. What matters is our country is under assault, a brutal, barbaric assault. And it requires everyone who loves the state of Israel to stand tall and strong with her. And especially in the coming weeks, we're all anticipating the beginning of a ground offensive. It will be a very challenging time, obviously, for the IDF, for those who wear the uniform and will be on the front lines, for the people of Israel with more rockets and who knows what else they'll unleash. Is it going to be the North and the South? It's a very concerning moment, and we want to make sure that the media has not been particularly fair. Obviously, you are a brilliant member of the media, so I'm not making this a personal comment. But
I agree with what you just said. That's true.
We have already seen the story that has been told, not really aligning with the reality and the facts that we know. So we're also going to be needed to, be present on social media, not just to read, but also to post, and to, in the larger arena of public opinion, to make sure that there are voices that are pro-Israel, that are as thoughtful as we need.
What you said about just how the communities are holding vigils, friends of mine who are members of Temple Beth Am in Miami sent me photos of packed. I mean, they said we had a bigger turnout, than Yom Kippur, which is usually the largest turnout. So you see that happening throughout communities all over within the movement. The reform movement traditionally very much aligned, I would say, with the Democratic Party. To an extent, I'm guessing that a lot of your members vote for the Democratic Party. And we know that anyhow, most American Jews do, high up in the 70%. But Joe Biden, the president, and the administration have been remarkable, right? I joke now, my younger kids have started calling him Saba Joe, right? And there's a running joke in Eretz Nehederet, which is like the Israeli version of Saturday Night Live. There's this one character who's a taxi driver who says, "I want my grandfather to be Joe Biden. I want my grandmother to be Rachel from Ofakim, the woman who had baked those cookies for the terrorists and was able to somehow survive." But more seriously, what has been your impression of the administration? I mean, I think in Israel we're pretty in awe. But how do you have good ties there? What do you make of it?
We've been extraordinarily impressed and inspired by President Biden. I'll just say, for the record, we were not surprised. Joe Biden loves the state of Israel. That is as deep in him as any commitment that he has. And the fact that he got on a plane in the midst of war, got himself over here, and didn't show up to give a sermon, showed up to give love, and sitting with the families of the hostages and the mourning families. I mean, that's partly who he is. Obviously, he's also a serious leader, and he sat with the war cabinet, had some really important things to share with the leadership at this moment. But I have to say they've been extraordinary. And I'll also say, back in the United States, thinking about the Homeland Security Secretary, Mayorkas, who's been meeting with a group of us regularly because of the, kind of heightened danger for North American Jews as this war unfolds. Obviously, it has increased danger. And I think the administration has put anti-Semitism front and center. It's put, obviously, support for the state of Israel front and center. And we're quite inspired. And we know this is not just a moment in the career of Joe Biden. This is part of who he is. And I think for those who, and there were one or two maybe people who thought that the Democratic commitment to the state of Israel was somehow less than the Republicans, I would just ask those folks to take a deep breath, read a few newspapers, and really assess how unbelievably specific and strong he's been. The two carrier groups that are in the Mediterranean off the coast of Israel and Lebanon, that's not just, because they have to be parked somewhere. That is a very clear message. And I think, as the president put it in one word, don't.
Right.
And I think every Israeli, and by the way, Israelis are not Democratic and Republican, they're a bigger continuum of opinion. I have not met a single Israeli who's not said, thank God for Joe Biden, thank God the United States-Israel relationship is strong. And, for those who thought that all of the tensions that have existed over the past months would somehow color what the U.S. would or would not do, I think that has all been proven to be less important than the things that bind us together.
So on that point, Rabbi Jacobs, in Israel, I think one of the reckonings that we're going to have to do when this is over, right? Not now, but definitely when it's over, is obviously deal with the people who were responsible for what led to the failures of the complete breakdown in our defenses, intelligence, and conceptions of Gaza, at the top, military intelligence and government political leadership. But also we have to look into ourselves and say, this rift and this division that we allowed ourselves to get caught up in, and I'm not placing blame on which side it was, but the reality is that there was this unprecedented civil strife, distracted us and weakened us and made us vulnerable. And our enemies were smart. They took advantage of the situation. And, I was watching a great sermon on Rosh Hashanah by Rabbi Angela Buchtal from Central Synagogue in New York. And I thought it was fantastic, really a great, powerful speech. But it was right before the United Nations General Assembly and Netanyahu's arrival in New York. And she was actively calling on members to come out and protest against Netanyahu. And I get that, right? I totally understand it. But I'm wondering if that reckoning that we're going to have to do here in Israel internally is also something that maybe you think the American Jewish community will have to do to an extent of whether does it need to have, of course, I mean, this is a complicated issue, but there's no such thing as unequivocal support. There's always going to be support with a but, right? But maybe this is a reset for everything. It's going to be a reset for our security in Israel and the paradigm with Hamas. And maybe it also needs to be something of a reset for the way our relationship is between Israel and diaspora Jewry to an extent.
I appreciate the question, Yaakov. And the cheshbon hanefesh, the inner work we're all going to have to do, and frankly, the larger policy work is going to be serious and extensive, but it's not for this moment. I would say very, very confidently that the protest movement that we participated in, I had the privilege of speaking at Kaplan. I also spoke at some of the smaller protests. I spoke at protests in New York. I also spoke at a protest during Netanyahu's visit. Those were protests for the state of Israel. Let's be really clear. They were public, they were strong, they were about the Israel that we love, the democratic Jewish state that must be not only strengthened, but defended on every level, on the borders of Israel, in the military, but also in the corridors of power, in the Supreme Court, and all those places. So I think, frankly, what energized the protest movement, I'm just going to speak specifically about North Americans, is how much we love and care about that state. And I think just like the Israeli protest movement on a dime, when it moved from a moment of the internal threats to Israel to the external, there wasn't even a second of pause. Those same groups are still very active, very motivated. And I think the idea that some of those groups have been demonized as somehow less than patriotic, I would think some of the cheshbon nefesh ought to be the way in which the protest movements have been characterized. But I also think,
and the way they've stepped up and are doing a lot of
unbelievable here. I've seen it; it's just extraordinary. But I also think that what we're seeing is that there's something deeper that binds us, and I think we can never ever lose that. That has been activated in incredible extent. I've seen it in different settings where I've been. How you voted in the last election here is actually not the most important question at the moment. right? We have so many differences. Our Jewish community, are you kidding? We could debate halakha, we could debate, politics, we could debate everything. But in this moment, the most important takeaway is we stand shoulder to shoulder. Doesn't mean we have to agree or we should agree on everything, but the biggest things we deeply agree on. The safety, well-being of our people, that is a global commitment, that is an eternal commitment. We'll get back to also the regular debates because that's our job, and those are important. I'm not going to say those are, kind of superficial. They're not. But this is a moment to remind us about the deepest ties that bind us one to the other.
Well, Rabbi Jacobs, let me just end by saying, and you being here is a perfect example of that, of coming to Israel and standing shoulder to shoulder with Israelis and showing us that the leader of the largest denomination of Jews and membership of Jews in America and movement is here. And we are Am Echad. We are one people. So I want to thank you, Rabbi Jacobs, for joining JPPI. Thank you very much.
It's been a privilege. Thank you for all you do.
So that was Rabbi Rick Jacobs. Again, I think, like we heard from Doron Almog yesterday, and as well as others, that there's this feeling, this enlistment of Jews from all over the world who feel that they have to be here and that this is their moment to stand together. And this really is, I think when we look at this maybe years later, it's obviously too early to tell now, but this is a pivotal moment. And we were talking about this earlier in the Institute today. I think it was the president of JPPI, Yedidia Stern, who said this is a moment that is going to change everything, right? It's changing, obviously, hopefully on the security front, and that's what we're all waiting to see how this all plays out, but also in our relations with other Jewish communities. There are going to be some significant changes, and that's what we want to talk about here today, specifically internally within Israel. So I'm just going to hand off for a few moments to Shmuel, who's going to present to us some of the more slides and more findings from the survey that JPPI did, and then we'll talk a bit about those results and what they mean. So Shmuel, take it away. You got to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. You
can. Okay. Had I known you'd speak with Rabbi Jacobs on the subject of Saba Joe Biden, I'd prepare we also have findings about Israelis and Joe Biden. So if you let me, maybe tomorrow or the day after, we'll bring in more slides and I'll show you the results on what Israelis feel concerning Joe Biden at this time. But today I brought some other things that we can share from the poll of Israelis. Let me just remind our viewers, those who weren't here yesterday, this is a poll that we conducted late last week of 800 Israelis, 600 Jews, 200 Arabs, analyzed by Professor Camille Fuchs of Tel Aviv University, one of the most well-known pollsters in Israel. And what we show here are a few nuggets from this poll. And we begin with what I believe is one of the best things to come out of this tragedy. And this is the country responding to the war with a great organization, volunteer work, support for the troops, support for the soldiers, support for the many evacuees from settlements near the Gaza border and towns and settlements near the northern borders of Israel. There are almost 200,000 Israelis that were evacuated from their homes in the last 2 weeks. Not all people are aware of the number. This is a vast number of people that were evacuated and need support, and Israeli organizations joined together to support them when the government didn't always rose to the challenge. So when we asked Israelis about their level of trust in those volunteer organizations, you can see that the level of trust is 96%. This is the level of trust that they have in IDF soldiers and nothing else. They don't have much trust in the government, nor in the police force, nor in any other institution in Israel. but the trust in volunteer organizations is quite dramatic, and I think this is something that we can draw on as we move forward with this crisis. Second, and this goes to the heart of what we are about to see in the coming weeks. The war, well, it started, but it didn't really start at this time. Israel is bombing in Gaza. It's bombing in response to a Hezbollah fire in the north, but a ground invasion did not really start. We all expect it to start in some sense, or assume it will start at some point. But when we asked Israelis, do they feel that Israel acted correctly since the attack? And again, we asked this late last week, so things might have slightly changed since then. What we clearly see is that many Israelis are still on the fence. They are undecided. They think it's too early to tell whether the response is too weak or too strong. There are quite a few Israelis who think that the response is pretty much as it should be, but the difference between those who think that the response has been too weak and those who think that the response has been too strong is dramatic. Third of Jewish Israelis already feel that the response is too weak. Namely, they want the government and the IDF to take the initiative and be more aggressive in their response against Hamas. The number of Jewish Israelis, this is of course different for Arab Israelis. Many Arab Israelis do feel that Israel's response is too strong, but for Jewish Israelis to feel that the response is too weak, that's a negligible number, 1%. It's within the margin of error. There are basically no Israelis who feel that the response has been too strong, which means that Israelis, at least at the current time, expect the government and the IDF to intensify the response, to be more aggressive and to be more determined in their attempt to defeat Hamas in Gaza. Third slide, and this goes into, Yaakov, yesterday we had some discussion about the politics in Israel.
Right.
And what we can see here are some differences that are already occurring between supporters of the coalition and supporters of the opposition when it comes to sharing the blame. When we ask people who's the most responsible for the failures at the outset of the crisis, and clearly there was an intelligence and operational failure on Shabbat 2 weeks ago. What we can see here that in the general public, it's about 25% saying the government is more responsible, a similar number, 26%, saying the IDF and the Shin Bet are more responsible, and 41% are saying they share the blame equally. However, when we look into the different camps, the two political camps, opposition and coalition, we do see a stark difference. Coalition supporters tend to put much more of the blame on the IDF and the Shin Bet, not the political leaders whom they support. And on the opposition, we see the opposite of that. We see more blame is attributed to the political leaders and less so to the IDF and the Shin Bet. So the beginning of a post-war rift we can already see those initial debates that will probably intensify when the war is over and committees are formed to investigate what happened at the beginning of the crisis. Last slide, and this is especially for you, Rivka. Just before the war, the Knesset was supposed to reconvene and pass legislation that will exempt a young ultra-Orthodox male from military service. So we asked Israelis, in the current circumstances, Well, you can see the language of the question. Before the war started, the government was going to bring a bill. If such a bill were to reach the Knesset after the war, would you support or oppose it? We, of course, wanted to know if this moment of war changed the attitudes towards the possibility of exemption for Haredi youngsters. And as you can see here, the level of opposition to such legislation is quite high. It's 60%. And I can tell you that the main shift, in the opposition, there was always resistance to such legislation. The main change is within the coalition, mostly amongst Zionist religious voters. The Zionist religious voters who many of them tended to support the legislation for political considerations, now feel that it's not the time or it's not the right thing to do. And also many members of Likud, secular or traditional members of Likud, no longer feel that they can support such legislation. And basically the only sector in which there is a majority of people who still support such legislation is the ultra-Orthodox community. In all other communities, secular, traditional, modern Orthodox or Zionist religion, all of these communities, a majority of people oppose the legislation. Only the Haredi community still support it. We have more information and more slides in the coming days if you want me to present them, Yaakov, but we'll end this for now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shmuel. I just want to remind our listeners, you have the Q&A box. Feel free to drop in a question. We're happy to take some. We have a couple. So two big issues that I think we have to talk about following Rabbi Jacobs, but also with the polling. One is obviously, we kind of spoke about yesterday more the political class, right? And Netanyahu and his personal responsibility to either announce, I am responsible because he has yet to do so. But also it's very interesting when you look at the breakdown between people in the coalition and people on the opposition, who's responsible. I mean, that number is astounding, right? You're 49% of the coalition, believes that it's the IDF and the Shabak. And as opposed to 7% of the opposition who believes that they're the ones who are more responsible, right? So I'm curious, let's start with you, Rivka, and then I do want to dive into the Haredi issue. But when you look at that, I mean, it seems that this is going to become highly politicized, right? It already is highly politicized, right? But when we look at that distinction between who is more responsible, government or the security services, how do you see this as we progress throughout this war? Is this something that people can actually say, okay, now's not the time, let's deal with this later? Or is this going to continue to fester and be with us throughout this whole conflict?
So I definitely think it's not the time. I think it's too early to ask these questions, especially we didn't see anything yet, like the army didn't really go in yet. So, and it's only naturally that the opposition will think that the government is shame, and the other side will think differently. So I think it's too early to ask. But of course, someone was shame, and we'll have to ask these big questions, and we'll have to get answers to them. And I believe we will get answers. But I think it's pretty much too early to really get good data about it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Shmuel?
Well, I agree with Rivka. It's too early, but it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it anyhow because such things are on everybody's minds, and whether we want it or not, this is what people are talking about with their families, with their neighbors, with their friends, with their co-workers. The war is an all-encompassing event. Most Israelis don't think these days much beyond things that are war-related. This is what we're doing almost all day long. People wake up in the morning, they're reminded there's war. They run to bomb shelters from time to time. I just came out of a bomb shelter an hour ago because there was missiles or rockets were sent to Tel Aviv. So this is something that's very much on our minds, and whether we like it or not. And I basically agree with the notion that for a nation at war, it's better not to think about politics. But I suspect that both the public and the politician, maybe even more so the politicians, do think about politics as well as the conduct of war. And that's why I don't think we can avoid the issue.
Yeah. You know, the two slides that kind of go together is the civil support, right? That has really shined during this conflict, and how people have stepped up. Spoke with Rabbi Jacobs about what the Achim L'Neshek, right? The brother and sisters in arms, and what how they shifted from being a protest movement to now being this all supportive movement and support system for Israel. But you also see that, by the way, within the Haredim. I saw a beautiful video just yesterday of this group, something Meron they're called. That's their name, somehow connected to Meron, but cooking for just tons of soldiers down south, and really very moving to see. And there's also stories that have now been in the media over the last couple of days of 2,000 ultra-Orthodox young men who have asked to serve now in the IDF, and that kind of ties in to the slide that has to do with what's known as Chok HaGiyus, as the IDF draft law that was going to give this kind of blanket exemption that was being demanded by the ultra-Orthodox parties of UTJ, United Torah Judaism, and Shas, and mostly UTJ, and is now, based on the poll at least, and I think everyone kind of understands, that will be very hard to get that through a Knesset in the aftermath of this conflict. So, Rivka, if you could walk us through what is happening, because it seems like just, on the surface right now, and this is all very preliminary, but that there is a definite shift that is taking place within the ultra-Orthodox community here in Israel. And we know for years that when it comes to chesed, when it comes to charitable organizations and doing good, you'll find them in hospitals and all over streets and in every facet of society. But here we're seeing something else, right? With definitely that has to do with security. How do you understand what's happening?
So as you said, it's not new in the Haredi community. You have Yad Sarah, you have Ezer Mitzion, you had Zaka, always were all Haredim. So chesed and giving and issues like that are in the heart of the Haredi community. But you do see a shift and a change around the issue of IDF, of taking part in the army. I want to tell you the truth. It's not in the mainstream. Okay, it's not that students go out of yeshivas and go to the army. And as a Haredi mother, I'm proud of my children still sitting and learning Torah, and I believe and I daven that they will still learn Torah, and I also really believe that the Torah protects us, and davening protects our soldiers as well. But those students that are not able to learn, and they don't sit in yeshivas, and they were used, I don't know what to do. So I think it's a nice thing that they are giving their time and going to the army, and I just hope that the army will know how to welcome them, because there were terrible stories after this Shabbos that there was Haredi soldiers that had to cook on Shabbat and be Mechal Shabbos for nothing, not for important things. So it's the same debate. It will, after the war, it will go all back, I think. It's very sad to say, but I really appreciate it, and I think it's a nice sign of our achdus and our ability to be all together, and in bad times to give a hand one to each other.
Right. What has me concerned, and I'm probably not unique in this, is that after the war, and it might even happen before, because we know who we are, we know our people here, people are going to start counting the dead and where they come from. And they're going to count that. We saw this in previous conflicts, right? We've seen this after previous wars. There was a famous scandal, controversy. Elazar Stern, the former head of the IDF Manpower Division after the Second Lebanon War, said, I'm looking at the deaths of people who died, soldiers. I don't see people from Tel Aviv. And whatever, he was wrong, but it was his way to kind of stick it to the so-called leftist progressives of Tel Aviv, and that called that caused a bit of a storm at the time between him and the longtime mayor, Ron Huldai. But I'm sure there are people who are going to be looking and say, okay, we got Tel Aviv, we got Jerusalem, we got Petah Tikva and all these other places across the country, Ofakim, but we don't have Beitar Illit, and we don't have Telstone, and we don't have parts of Jerusalem and Kiryat Sefer. That alone will lead us towards more division. And so I think, that's going to be unfortunate. Is there leadership within the Haredi movement that sees this happening, Rivka, and understands that this is a moment to really step up and to create a new relationship with the state?
So the sad thing is we do have Beitar Illit and we do have Telstone, and we did have a lot of shivas here now this week, but that's not the point. The mainstream rabbis, I don't see them changing their minds about the need of a small amount of students to still stay in yeshiva and learn Torah, and the ability of those students to protect Israel. And if you think about accounting from where the death comes from, so just look about civilians and soldiers. It has no, you can't compare it at all. So I don't think that's a question, but it's of course not a question for now.
Right. No, I'm not saying that that's what I'm going to do, but I just know the cynicism that we have within parts of the media and within society, and that's unfortunately something that's going to come up. And I think that the major work is needed. That Shmuel, more to the political question of seeing how this IDF draft law is probably dead in the water. What should we expect to happen? And will the Haredi parties in the coalition, will they have the same leverage over Netanyahu in the day after?
Well, first of all, you assume that Netanyahu is going to be there on the day after. I'm not sure that's a correct assumption.
Right.
The type of events that we now go through in Israel tend to lead to paradigm shifts in societies. We saw it after the 67 war, and after the 73 war, and after the first Lebanon war, and after the second Intifada. These all lead to paradigm shifts, both on the political level and the social level. So it's very difficult to predict at this early stage what's going to emerge after the war. But rarely I don't disagree with Rivka. We tend to disagree on many things, but she emphasized the fact that there is not a dramatic change within the Haredi community when it comes to the service of young yeshiva students, those Haredis who did volunteer and join the military. And I think that's a wonderful thing that happened, both because it testifies to the fact that we all feel in this together, and also because it normalizes it's good to see Haredi men in uniform. It normalizes such thing. But other than that, you don't see youngsters leaving yeshivas and joining the military. These are older people who already have families, who already have some job, or they do some odd jobs or whatever. That's not the main debate on which we are going to focus after the war. And I think the big question, both political and social, after the war is going to be there are three components that will need to be considered. First one is the security issue. The idea that Israel can live with a smaller, more professionalized army, that it doesn't need the masses, that's over. We need more people to guard our borders. That was clear on Saturday 2 weeks ago. And I think the idea that the IDF doesn't need more people, this notion is pretty much gone. So there will be no excuse of such sort that can exempt Haredis from service. The second point is the pressure from other groups within Israel on the ultra-Orthodox to participate in to share the burden. There is this, what Haredis want is important, but they're not alone here. There's also what other people want them to do, and I think there could be much more pressure on them to join in. Maybe some carrots and some sticks involved. There will be an interplay of negotiation on this issue. And the third point is the politics. What type of political coalition is going to emerge in Israel? Will it depend on the Haredi parties? Will they have the same power to prevent changes in budget allocations, etc.? All these things are far in the future, and I think it's too early to say what's going to happen. But it is very likely that things will have to change. Again, if we go back to the shock of the Yom Kippur War and you look at Israeli society in 74, 5, 6, 7, and 8, the society changed dramatically in those 5 years after the war. And a similar thing could happen in the coming years in Israel.
So I just one last question, Rivka. This comes at a time where this was already being discussed, not just because of the idea of draft law, but also because of the Haredi fertility rate, and the fact that the Haredi community, which is now about 13% of Israel's population, or about 1.3 million people, let's say, is on its way in the next, by 2050, 2055, we're looking at approaching 30%. And as that happens, that itself is a blessing, lots of people, and that's good, more Jews. But what we are seeing is this issue of, Shmuel talking about who's going to serve in the IDF, who's going to pay the taxes. So this change was going to have to come at some point, right? In other words, the shift was going to, I don't want to call it maybe a wake-up call, but it was bound to happen. Now we have this event. Are there people within the community who are thinking about this with a kind of 25-year vision?
Not the politicians. I don't think. I didn't realize them thinking too much further. I know that the Rabbanim, the rabbis, are thinking about it, and they do give answers to some questions as the security. So they do let boys go into Shirut Leumi and do all kinds of things. And some of them even let them go into the army for Haredi units, like Netzach Yehuda and things like that. So there is a debate. But again, as I said, the mainstream of the Rabbanim, of the rabbis, and the heads of yeshivas, Roshei Yeshivot, are still, they still want the good students, the young students, to stay in yeshiva. And if you look around the world, if you see that we are 15 or 18 million Jews, if you go according to Pew or to other polls, so it's really a very small percent of Jews that sit and learn Torah. It's really like it's a promille. So of course they will give answers, and they will take part. And of course, when they get a bigger part of Israel, so they will have to give answers. But at this point, no one will tell you he wants yeshiva students to go out from the yeshiva.
Right. This is just another issue, ladies and gentlemen, of what Israel is going to have to grapple with, right? I think, Rivka gave it to us very straight and very clear of the state, the different positions together with Shmuel. And while we're very focused on the security at the moment, there is a reckoning that's coming, I think, for all of Israel's society, from the political level down to how we function in our different government ministries, and how to a large extent they have unfortunately failed civil society at the moment, but also in some of these issues that were very tense prior to this conflict, how they're continuing already and how they're going to play out in the future. So I want to thank Rivka Ravitz and Shmuel Rosner, senior fellows at JPPI, and all of you for joining us this evening. We'll be back tomorrow evening again for another look at what's happening, kind of a deeper analysis of what's happening in the Israel-Hamas war. In the meantime, prayers for a peaceful night.